Hi, everybody, and welcome to Love Fraud Live. Why do psychopaths behave so badly, and why are they so resistant to changing their behavior? I'm Donna Anderson, author of lovefraud.com and host of the True Lovefraud Stories podcast. After betrayal by a sociopath, I help you to understand what happened, put down the emotional burden, and move forward. Tonight, I will explain a new study that shows certain important parts of psychopathic brains are smaller than normal, and I'll talk about what this means for their behavior. At the end of this short presentation, I'll answer your questions, and I present a lot of great content here on these Love Fraud Live videos, so I do hope that you will subscribe. That way, you'll be notified about all of my upcoming videos. Okay, so let's get started. Psychopaths have more than an attitude problem. They are cold, uncaring, manipulative, and aggressive, due in part to their biology. The overall volume of gray matter in psychopath brains is less than normal, and new research shows that specific areas of their brains are smaller. So, what does this mean? Psychopathic traits and behaviors are baked into their heads. Changing their behavior means changing their brains, which may not be impossible, but it is certainly difficult. So before I get into the research, let me lay just a little bit of groundwork. First, I'll talk about the human brain. This is a magnificent organ that sets us apart from other living creatures. Then I'll explain how psychopathy is measured, and after that, I'll describe the new research and what it means. By the way, if you think that the person you're involved with is, in quotes, only a narcissist, and this information doesn't apply to you, well, think again. There is a lot of overlap among all these manipulative personality disorders, and the diagnostic criteria are not clear-cut. So you may think that you're dealing with only a narcissist, again in quotes, when the person may actually be antisocial or a psychopath. I've heard of plenty of people described as narcissists, but then when I looked at their behavior, it sure seemed psychopathic to me. Okay, so here's the background on the brain. The outermost layer of the brain is called the cerebral cortex, which is also known as gray matter. It has many folds with deep grooves and raised areas. This has the effect of increasing the size of the brain and enabling us to process large amount of information, according to the Cleveland Clinic. Now, scientists have known for years that psychopaths tend to have less gray matter than people who are not disordered. But new research has identified that particular areas of the brain, which correspond with particular aspects of psychopathy, are smaller. So who are we talking about here? Psychopaths are people who routinely violate social norms and cause harm to others, although they are not necessarily serial killers. In fact, many psychopaths aren't even violent at all. Back in the 1990s, a psychologist named Dr. Robert Hare developed a way to measure an individual's level of disorder. This is called the Psychopathy Checklist Revised, or PCLR, and it is a list of 20 traits and behaviors. A clinician determines how well each particular trait describes the individual, and here's how it works. The scores are 0, 1, and 2 for each trait. 0 means the person doesn't show this trait or behavior at all. 1 means the person sometimes shows the trait or behavior, and 2 means that this trait or behavior definitely describes the individual. So total scores range from 0 to 40. A normal person may score about 4 or 5. But people who score 30 or above are considered to have severe psychopathic disturbances. My ex-husband, who was never violent towards me, scored a 39. The Hare PCLR has been validated by hundreds of studies, and the validation process revealed that psychopathy has two distinct factors. Factor 1 includes interpersonal and affective problems, meaning difficulties with emotions. The Factor 1 traits are glibness and charm, grandiosity and entitlement, conning and manipulative, pathological lying, lack of remorse and guilt, shallow affect, lack of empathy and callousness, and failure to accept responsibility. So these are considered to be the core features of psychopathy. Now, Factor 2 describes impulsive and antisocial behavior. These traits are need for stimulation, impulsivity, poor behavior controls, irresponsibility, parasitic lifestyle, a lack of realistic goals, criminal versatility, violation of conditional release, juvenile delinquency, and early behavior problems. Plus, there are two other traits of psychopathy that aren't included in the factors, and they are sexual promiscuity and short-term marital relationships. So, these factors were studied in the research that I will talk about. The new paper is entitled Associations of Brain Structure with Psychopathy. Very original. But the researchers examined the MRI brain images of 39 diagnosed psychopaths and compared them to 39 matched controls who were not disordered. Their hypothesis proposed that the behavioral traits forming the two PCLR factions involved different sections of the brain. So they were looking for correlations between brain structures and the Factor 1 and Factor 2 scores. Well, they found them. First of all, the researchers found that the psychopathic subjects' brains were 1.45% smaller. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but the researchers termed this as, and I quote, a significant volume deficit. Then, the researchers did find volume deficits, that means smaller areas, in several sections of the brain associated with Factor 2, which is the antisocial behavior. The affected areas are thought to be relevant for behavior control. Now, as far as Factor 1 goes, however, the patterns were less clear-cut. There was only weak associations with disturbances in particular brain regions, which means that different individuals have different levels of disturbance. Now, I recently read a book called Mind to Matter, written by Dawson Church, and he explains that the human brain is always changing, and it changes rapidly. In fact, the brain is like a muscle, in that the parts of the brain that you use get bigger, and the parts that you don't use atrophy. So this new research found that the brain volume deficits were in areas associated with behavior control. So that means the psychopaths aren't using those areas. They are not controlling their behavior. And I imagine that you've probably seen this. So, is there hope? Can this be reversed? Can a psychopathic brain unlearn bad behavior and develop empathy, a conscience, or the ability to love? Well, our brains are plastic, meaning that they can change. But change comes about through desire and practice. Most psychopaths don't have any desire to change. In fact, many of them are proud of their lack of emotion and conscience, because this allows them to go after what they want without feeling any guilt. So how do I know this? Well, people who identified themselves as psychopaths and sociopaths actually wrote to me and told me that. So if they change at all, psychopaths tend to modify the factor 2 behaviors. They get better at behavior control, and that means that they're less impulsive and perhaps better at things like staying out of jail. But the research shows that the factor 1 traits, such as glibness, conning, and pathological lying, typically do not change. So that's why the factor 1 traits are considered to be the core of this disorder. The bottom line is anyone with psychopathy or antisocial personality disorder, or perhaps also narcissistic personality disorder, is unlikely to develop the ability to love and a conscience. So if you have any people like this in your life, your best bet is to put them out of your life. That's the presentation for tonight. If you're dealing with a psychopath, antisocial, or narcissist, always feel free to reach out to me. I can help you understand what's happening, and I can help you to put down the emotional burden and move forward. For more information, please visit lovefraud.com/talk to Donna. Also, be sure to check out the True Lovefraud Stories podcast, where survivors tell their own outrageous stories of betrayal. I also interview experts who address issues that are raised in the stories. So you can listen to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, like Apple Podcast, or also on YouTube and YouTube Music, or at lovefraud.com/podcast. Finally, please subscribe to Love Fraud Live. When you do, you'll automatically be notified about all my new videos. Plus, by subscribing, you'll boost the distribution of Love Fraud Live, helping to spread the word about all those psychopaths and sociopaths who live among us. And you'll also find links to the research paper that I discussed in the window below the video, along with other helpful links. So, now I'll answer your questions. Okay, we have a comment that SBDS Inc. is looking forward to this, so I will let everybody catch up on the video and discuss a little bit more about the confusion between psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder. The basic problem for all of us who are trying to figure out psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder and these exploiters and what it means is that there is a lot of disagreement in the mental health field. There's disagreement between the psychopathy researchers and the clinicians. This, of course, just makes things more confusing for us. So, as far as terminology is concerned, psychopathy is the term that is used by probably most of the university researchers that do all the research like what I just talked about. And the reason that they use the term psychopathy is because this is the term that is used in the PCLR, which I described, and the PCLR is what enables fairly precise analysis to take place because of the scoring system. If you look at antisocial personality disorder, there is no scoring system. So it's just kind of like a checklist. So the psychopathy checklist revised is much more precise, which enables there to be sophisticated research done on it. Now, the PCLR was originally designed to determine a prisoner's propensity or the possibility of recidivism. Dr. Robert Hare actually worked in a prison, and one of his responsibilities was to figure out who, if they get released, would recidivate, which means commit another crime, and who would not. So that was the whole reason that he developed the PCLR, which is why it has a bunch of questions related to like conditional release and criminal versatility. So the PCLR measures both behaviors and traits, which is, what I said. So it measures the traits like glibness and charm, and grandiosity and entitlement and things like that. Interestingly enough, the PCLR and psychopathy is not included in the DSM-5, and that's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, and this is the Bible for psychiatrists and clinicians. This is the book that they all refer to in order to come up with a diagnosis, and in fact, they have to have a diagnosis out of this book in order to bill insurance companies, for any treatment. And psychopathy is not even listed as a diagnosable condition in the DSM-5. It's kind of a mess, and the whole situation came about basically because of political disagreements among the people in the American Psychiatric Association. So, for that reason, the DSM-5 is used by most clinicians, psychiatrists, and psychologists, anyone who comes up with a diagnosis. And the PCLR and the term psychopathy is used by the research psychologists. So it's a mess. And unfortunately, it's a mess that none of us can do anything about, because it's these experts, it's these associations, they're the ones who are making the determinations, and they're just not being very clear about it. So, another thing that I wanted to mention is that I talk a lot about my colleague, Dr. Liane Leedom, who is a psychiatrist, and she talks about defining, or the cause, I should say it that way, the cause of psychopathy, she believes, is an out-of-control drive for dominance. And this again ties into the different aspects of what the brain does, because there are different structures in the brain that are associated with different drives that we have. Now, there are 4 drives associated with people interacting with each other. These are built-in, baked-in drives that we have. 3 of them are associated with romantic love, and if you've watched my videos before, you've probably heard me talk about them. So these 3 drives are attachment, which means the desire to be around somebody, that you think somebody is special and you want to have them in your life. Sex, which is self-explanatory, and caregiving. Psychopaths can have 2 of these 3 disorders, and these 3 drives. And the 3 drives are crucial to romantic love: attachment, sex, and caregiving. So psychopaths can do 2 of the 3. They can do attachment. They certainly can do sex. They do not do caregiving. So for this reason, psychopaths and antisocials, maybe to a lesser degree narcissists, do not have the ability to authentically love. There's also a 4th social motivation, and this is the desire for power. Now, this isn't necessarily a terrible thing, because the power motivation makes us want to be successful, makes us want to have a nice house, to do well in our careers, win at a contest, do well in athletics. All of this is related to the power motivation. But for most people who have the ability to love, that ability to love puts the brakes on the power motivation. In other words, people who are normal will go after what they want, but they don't necessarily want to crush other people in the process. Psychopaths and antisocials, however, do not have this ability to love. Therefore, they do not have anything to put the brakes on when they want to go after things. So that's what they're talking about, with these disorders. There's nothing in their brains, nothing within them that enables them to love, which and for that reason, their drive for power gets out of control, and that means their drive for dominance is out of control. And what the psychopaths mostly want? Power and control. And that's the only thing that really gives them pleasure and really makes them happy. So, one more point. The study that I discussed was talking, what they did was that they took MRI, actually it's called fMRI, functional MRI, brain images of both the psychopaths and the controls, the people who were not disordered. So, they put them in an MRI machine, look at the brain, measure it as it takes a lot of pictures. I've never seen how they do this, but it generates all these pictures, and then they analyzed all this stuff. So I guess it's fair to ask, does that mean that people can determine whether or not psychopathy or somebody has psychopathy with a brain scan? So far, the answer is not yet. Maybe with this research and some other research, they're getting closer to be able to determine, whether or not there is a way to look at the MRI and see if someone has psychopathy. But most people think, or most experts think, so far it's not there yet. Maybe in the future it will be, but not at the moment. So, and actually, one of the reasons why it won't work is precisely what was discussed in this research, is that the core traits of psychopathy, the factor 1, this was where they were not able to see definitive differences in the brain structures. I mean, they were for factor 2, but there wasn't a big enough difference in the factor 1 locations of the brain. And in the research paper, they name all these parts of the brain and what they do. But anyway, this research proved that it's hard. So at least at the moment, it's not possible to determine, whether or not someone is disordered with a brain scan. Okay. Well, it looks like I did all the talking tonight. We don't have any questions. So I thank you for listening to this presentation. I hope you found it helpful in understanding. And the bottom line is that people with these disorders, it is a very distinct part of their biology. It's who they are. So consequently, it's unlikely that they're going to change. So if you realize that you're involved with someone like this, put yourself first, protect yourself, and get the person out of your life, or at least limit your exposure to this individual. So I thank you for joining me tonight. I'm actually going to be away for a while, so I'll be back with the next episode of Love Fraud Live in a couple of weeks. So until then, thank you very much and have a good evening. Good night.